Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today we're talking about album number 10 from Squarepusher, Just a Souvenir. Right, I'm just going to start off this video by telling you the story of what this album title means and where the idea of it came from. So it appears that one day, Tom Jenkinson was daydreaming, and while doing so, he envisioned a rock band that was playing in front of a neon coat hanger. The band's instruments were either completely of their own design, or modified conventional instruments that would make sounds not associated with those instruments. The guitarist could make the entire place time travel. The drummer's drums would rapidly switch places with one another. A river suddenly appeared under the band and made some of them start kayaking, and others get electrocuted but not actually visibly affected. I think I read something about one of the members turning into two cavemen playing Monopoly, and after the daydream just kinda fizzled out, he says his memory of the vision was his only souvenir, and he set out to make an album based off of said memory. And this album is the result. Now, if your thoughts upon reading that were, what the actual fuck kind of drugs was this guy on to come up with that, while awake no less, I agree completely. Just reading his thoughts on this album made me feel like I was on drugs. So as far as the actual music goes, this album is kind of a major point in the Squarepusher catalog where fans have really started to become polarized. A lot of love it or hate it kind of reactions. Some people praise it to high heaven, and others mark it as the point at which Jenkinson completely fell off and never recovered. I myself am probably going to lean towards the positive side in this case. For the record, I don't consider any of the mainline Squarepusher albums bad. Even Do You Know Squarepusher is okay. But I do have my misgivings with Just a Souvenir as well. Now, this album is a mix of the melodic Hello Everything style he explored with even more jazz elements, as well as rock and pop elements in some areas, the rock stuff especially. It can be a bit of a mess, and the actual compositions aren't consistently enjoyable enough to completely get away with it. But it is quite the dense and genre-bending listen, one of the most unique entrants in the Squarepusher discography, and I have to give it points for creativity. So let's go down track by track. The opener on this thing is one of the best tracks, of course. Certainly among the cleanest sounding tracks on here. All the quirky melodies floating around are quite pleasant and spirit-lifting despite their musical complexity. It sounds vaguely poppy and almost video game soundtracky in parts, but you can tell a lot of love was put into it. The progressions of sparkly vibraphone sounds in the background of certain parts also add some welcome texture and fan service to me personally. The next track though is a very close competitor for best track on the album, the Coathanger. Certainly a far catchier track than Startime 2's, similarly poppy sounding, though kinda more low-key with these quick, funky bass lines and vocoder vocals, but not much in the way of percussion. About equally good in the groove department there as the opener. And this poppier vocoder side of the album is revisited on A Real Woman, which is kind of difficult for me to take seriously. It combines the vocoders with some rougher, fuzzed out guitar textures and plays this super campy pop rock tune, like Daft Punk if they lived up to their name more and were on a shoestring budget working out of their garages. It is definitely catchy, and there are a couple of jazzier passages to help make things more engaging for me, but between its being so lighthearted and peppy, the almost embarrassingly cheap and low-quality production, its almost but not quite conventional instrumental palette, and the lyrics, which I guess are praising some girl purely for existing, it's just a very silly-sounding track that is very difficult to take seriously, and I don't know if I consider it a major favorite from here. Coathanger, despite the weirder subject matter, was a lot looser and funkier and easier for me to get into, but I digress. Both tracks are good. And something like A Real Woman helps Just a Souvenir stand out more in his back catalog, and totally is not foreshadowing for the next album. Now, there are a handful of classical guitar interludes on this album, much like the bass solo interludes on Ultra Visitor, including Open Society, Aqueduct, Fluxgate, and the closer Yes Sequitur. They do vary in mood. Open Society is a bit on the mysterious side, the closer is of course pretty warm and comfortable, and Aqueduct and Fluxgate add in a bit of experimental edge with some weird synths coming in for accompaniment. Now, of course, I do have to address the elephant in the room for this album, which is the guitar-based rock tracks here, which, I don't dislike any of them, but the sound quality of the guitars on here is very bad. It's all extremely fuzzed out and distorted. Like, by itself, this shouldn't be a problem. Like, the live version of Squarepusher theme from the Electrac album last year is a good example of this sound done right. Trouble here is that it so often pushes other elements out of the mix and makes what could have been pretty sonically interesting moments on here sound flatter. I think the only time where he's able to use the distortion to his advantage is Delta V, where everything is based around the same guitar riffs, and it's pretty catchy all things considered. Kinda feels like the more rhythmically complex version of Orbital's Quality Seconds or something. I know there is like an entire genre of that is out of my typical review boundaries, but whatever. But the distortion is a hindrance to other tracks later on, like Planet Gear, Tensor and Green, and to a lesser extent the Glass Road, that all have more moving parts. I mean, Planet Gear is actually a pretty great track by itself. The melodies that come in near the end make up for the bad mixing for the most part, and the Glass Road makes up for it by just being so much more complex, having so many sections that come and go between the guitars, like harps and bells and other little light, jazzy and funky passages in various parts. Not necessarily both at once. It's just that pad of fuzzy distortion that carries over a good chunk of the track that takes away attention from the sound design and excellent composition and prevents me from putting it above something like Plotinus or Tetrasync, despite maybe having even more musical elements than those two. It comes close, at least personal enjoyment-wise. One of the best tracks on here, despite that one major gripe I have with it. But when a distortion-heavy track has less to fall back on, like in the case of Tensor and Green, the track doesn't have as much left for me to recommend. It just kind of comes off as a noisy bridge between tracks that doesn't sound all that good. Now again, I suppose one could chalk a lot of these guitar-related complaints up to my not being into this particular style of guitar playing. For it to be this incredibly fuzzed out and insane is certainly good for the aesthetics of other artists and bands which I don't listen to. If you're into that kind of thing, I'm sure it won't be a problem for you. And I suppose it can be credited to the incredible insanity of the original vision that inspired the album. Certainly makes the album more insane. Thankfully, there are a number of cleaner sounding jazz tracks to balance out the noisier and harsher stuff, some more lighthearted takes on the music is routed one note style, as seen on Potential Governor, Duotone, Moonbeam, and Quadrature. Okay, Potential Governor has some pretty heavily distorted moments too, but in general the musicianship and caffeinated performances are put more into focus here. And in the case of the latter two, it's even smoother and lighter, with Duotone Moonbeam acting as a mysterious jazz interlude piece or something, and Quadrature being a more fleshed out and well-defined track with all these low-key guitar progressions. Neither precisely the most memorable tracks on here, but they're highlights for me personally since they actually sound well produced. That's kinda my biggest problem with the album as a whole. It's weighed down pretty heavily by very inconsistent and generally below average production. Even on some of the better moments like Startime 2 and The Glass Road, the mixing makes what should be really fun and or impressive tracks feel tinny and closed into a tiny box, and prevents me from being able to really fully put my all into my recommendation for this album. It is not a particularly great sounding album, and even though Squarepusher isn't exactly known for his mixing skills, this is the first time the production was bad enough that it started to become distracting to me and actively take away from my experience. But what it lacks on the production and mixing side, it makes up for in sheer ambition and complexity. There are so many ideas and elements put into this album, and most of them are good ideas. I like the fusion of all these genres. Sure, some people may say that he was trying to do too many things at once, but I would actually argue against that. Because he managed to strike a good balance between all of these styles so that they didn't feel unnatural next to each other, and that no moment on here felt out of place. There's no vacuum garden trying to go for a completely different aesthetic to the rest of the album and feeling like it doesn't belong. And much like how Ultravisitor had a consistent gravitas and seriousness that carried over its wide variety of sounds and styles, Just a Souvenir is consistent in its absurdity and lack of seriousness. It managed to feel like an album despite the mess of things that went into it. Not to mention, I like how he's kept his jazz influence in play on the album. There are more moments on this thing that I like than I don't. At times, the strength of the composition wins out over the mediocre production. The End of Planet Gear is one of the biggest examples in that regard, as I mentioned before. It's just that this album had the potential to be great and cross over into the 8 range, and that potential was just squandered in the mixing booth. Yeah, a lot of mixed thoughts on this thing in general. I fully understand both the camps that love and hate it. But one thing's for sure, the vision of this album and its ambition is the reason for checking it out. Its particular blend of elements and styles is so unlike anything else I've heard that I kind of have to recommend it regardless. And there are enough things that I enjoy that I can sign off on it. This likely won't be the last time I come back to it either, so yeah. I'd say in the end, check it out, but be warned, it might not quite reach the stars it was aiming for. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.